It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
Wow. I mean, what an opening line. It just pulls you right in.
Instantly. You're immediately in Jane Austen's world, aren't you? Pride and Prejudice, 1813, early 19th century England. And it's so much more than just, a romance novel. People often label it that way, but it's got such sharp social commentary woven through it.
It absolutely does. And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To get
Yeah.
under the surface.
Right.
We want to unpack those layers Austen gives us about society, about how people grow
Mhm.
or don't grow,
Mm-hmm.
and what real connection actually means.
And how those ideas, Pride and Prejudice, they didn't just define that era, they still kind of echo today, which is fascinating.
It's remarkable how relevant it remains.
So we'll be looking closely at Elizabeth Bennet. She's our smart, witty, very independent heroine.
Hmm.
And Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy starts off seeming incredibly wealthy, proud, maybe arrogant. But there's more to him.
Definitely more. And their first meetings, oh boy, they don't just kick off the plot, they perfectly frame these big themes Austen wants to explore. Pride, prejudice, all of it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. How does Austen throw us into this world? It starts with an arrival, right?
Yeah, it all kicks off in Longbourn with the Bennet family. 5 daughters, not much fortune, and then boom, Mr. Bingley arrives. Rich, single.
Cue Mrs. Bennet.
Exactly. Her hopes go into overdrive, especially for her eldest daughter, Jane. It's almost comical, but it immediately shows you the economic reality for women back then. Marriage wasn't just romance, it was often financial necessity.
Austen wastes no time showing us that pressure.
None at all. It's the engine driving so much of the action.
And then Bingley brings his friend to the local ball, Mr. Darcy.
The grand entrance.
Yeah, and he makes quite the impression, or rather, fails to make a good one. He refuses to dance with Elizabeth.
Famously. Calls her tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me.
Ouch. Right. Instantly unpopular. His pride, his standoffishness,
Yeah.
it rubs everyone the wrong way, especially Elizabeth.
But here's the thing. Is Elizabeth's dislike just about his rudeness? Or is Austen showing us Elizabeth's own tendency to maybe jump to conclusions? Her own bit of pride in her judgment?
That's a great point, because his behavior is pretty bad.
Oh, it's undeniably arrogant, no question.
But Elizabeth latches onto that negative first impression, and then comes Mr. Wickham.
Wickham, the charming officer. Seems like such a nice guy.
Totally. And he feeds Elizabeth this sob story about how horribly Darcy treated him, cheated him out of his inheritance.
A complete fabrication, as we find out later. But it perfectly confirms Elizabeth's existing bias against Darcy. It cements her prejudice.
And the irony is just delicious, isn't it? While she's digging her heels in, thinking Darcy's this awful person.
He's actually starting to notice her. Her intelligence, her wit, that spark she has. He's intrigued despite himself, despite the social differences.
You see something real there.
Yeah, past the surface stuff, which sets up so much conflict later.
Okay, so things start to get complicated. Jane and Bingley seem to be hitting it off.
It looks really promising. Genuine affection there.
And then Bingley just leaves, goes back to London abruptly.
And Jane is heartbroken. Later, we learn Darcy and Bingley's sisters basically convinced him Jane wasn't, serious enough or maybe good enough for him.
Class prejudice rearing its head again.
Big time. And social maneuvering.
Oh.
Austen showing how easily genuine feelings could be trampled by those concerns.
And speaking of awkward social situations, Mr. Collins arrives.
Oh, Mr. Collins. The cousin who stands to inherit the Bennet property because, entailment laws. He's a clergyman, very pompous.
And he decides he needs a wife. And Elizabeth is next on his list after Jane is seemingly taken. His proposal is just something else.
It's awful. So practical and devoid of any real feeling. And Elizabeth thankfully turns him down flat.
Much to Mrs. Bennet's horror.
Oh, she's furious. But Collins doesn't waste time. He proposes to Elizabeth's best friend, Charlotte Lucas, the very next day.
And Charlotte says yes.
She does. And this is such a key moment. Charlotte chooses financial security, a home, over any chance of romantic love. It's pragmatic.
It really drives home Austen's critique of marriage as like an economic arrangement for women.
Absolutely. Charlotte's choice isn't judged harshly by Austen, I think. It's presented as a clear-eyed decision based on her limited options. A survival strategy, really. It highlights just how precarious things were for women without independent wealth.
Stark reminder. Okay, so Elizabeth rejects Collins, but then she runs into Darcy again while visiting Charlotte and the newly married Mr. Collins.
Yep, awkward encounters abound. And then, somehow, Darcy decides to propose to Elizabeth.
The first proposal. And it's memorable.
Memorable for being possibly the most arrogant, backhanded proposal in literature. He basically tells her he loves her, despite her inferior family connections and social standing.
Like he's doing her a massive favor.
Exactly. And Elizabeth, understandably, is having none of it.
She lets him have it. Tells him exactly what she thinks of his arrogance, his role in breaking Jane's heart, and how terribly he treated Wickham.
It's a fiery rejection. This is where their pride and their prejudice just collide spectacularly, face to face.
But the aftermath is crucial.
Absolutely pivotal. Darcy doesn't just storm off. He's stung, yes, but he comes back the next day and hands her a letter.
The letter, capital L.
Capital L, absolutely.
No.
Because this letter just blows Elizabeth's whole worldview apart. It contains some bombshells.
Okay, what does this say?
Well, first he explains why he separated Jane and Bingley. He genuinely believed Jane wasn't that into Bingley, that her feelings weren't deep, and he was trying to protect his friend from potential heartbreak or maybe social climbing.
Okay. Whether he was right or wrong, that's his reason.
That was his perception, yes, trying to protect his friend. But the bigger bombshell is about Wickham.
What about Wickham?
Darcy reveals the truth. Wickham wasn't wronged by him at all. In fact, Wickham received his inheritance, squandered it, asked for more, was refused, and then tried to elope with Darcy's own 15-year-old sister, Georgiana, purely to get his hands on her fortune.
Whoa. Okay, that paints a very different picture of Mr. Charming Wickham.
Completely different. He's the villain. Darcy intervened to save his sister. And Elizabeth reads this, and the floor just drops out from under her.
Everything she thought she knew.
Shattered. She's forced to confront her own judgment, her pride and her ability to see people clearly, her prejudice against Darcy, fueled by Wickham's lies and her first impressions. It's a massive aha moment.
A real turning point for her character. She has to reevaluate everything.
Precisely. And this really kicks off her period of growth, of self-reflection. It's not instant, but the seeds are sown.
And then her perception starts to shift even more when she visits Pemberley, right? Darcy's estate.
Yes. She goes on a trip with her aunt and uncle, thinks Darcy is away, and they tour his magnificent home, Pemberley. And she's impressed, not just by the wealth, but by the taste, the elegance.
What his housekeeper says about it?
Exactly. The housekeeper speaks incredibly highly of him. Kind master, generous landlord, good brother. It's a totally different image than the proud, aloof man from the Meryton ball.
And then Darcy unexpectedly shows up.
And instead of being awkward or arrogant, he's gracious. He's kind to her aunt and uncle, attentive to Elizabeth. He's acting like a true gentleman.
So she's seeing the man behind the initial, facade. The barriers are coming down.
They really are. You could feel the ice thawing between them. She's starting to see his real character, his depth.
But just when things might be heading in a positive direction, disaster strikes.
Always the way, isn't it? News arrives that Lydia, Elizabeth's youngest, flightiest sister, has run off with, guess who?
Oh, no. Wickham.
Wickham, the scoundrel. They've eloped, unmarried, which in that society is a massive scandal. It threatens to ruin the entire Bennet family's reputation. Forever.
Total catastrophe. Elizabeth is devastated, feels responsible even.
And this is where Darcy does something truly remarkable. And importantly, he does it secretly.
What does he do?
He tracks them down, finds Lydia and Wickham in London. And then he essentially pays Wickham off, gives him a significant sum of money to convince him to actually marry Lydia.
He pays Wickham to marry her, to save the Bennet family's honor.
Yes, without seeking any thanks or credit. Elizabeth only finds out later, accidentally, through Lydia mentioning Darcy was at her wedding. He does it purely out of, well, arguably his growing feelings for Elizabeth and a sense of honor.
Wow. That completely flips the script on his character from the beginning. It shows immense generosity and integrity.
It's the ultimate proof of his true character, contradicting every negative first impression. True virtue, Austen seems to say, isn't always showy. It's often quiet, behind the scenes.
Okay, so Darcy saves the day, secretly. What happens next? How do things wrap up?
Well, the Lydia situation, though scandalous, is contained thanks to Darcy, and then influenced partly by Darcy admitting he might have misjudged Jane's feelings, Bingley returns to Longbourn.
And finally proposes to Jane.
Finally, much to everyone's relief, especially Mrs. Bennet's. So Jane gets her happy ending.
And what about Elizabeth and Darcy?
Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Darcy's very formidable, very snobby aunt. Hears a rumor they might be engaged and storms down to Longbourn to forbid Elizabeth from ever accepting Darcy.
Which backfires spectacularly, right?
Completely. Elizabeth stands up to her, refuses to promise anything. And when Darcy hears about this confrontation, it actually gives him hope that Elizabeth's feelings might have changed.
So he proposes again.
He does, a second time. But this proposal is totally different. It's humble, it's sincere. He acknowledges his past arrogance.
And Elizabeth. Her pride is gone, her prejudice is resolved.
She's seen the real Darcy. She understands herself better.
Yeah.
And she realizes she's truly in love with him. So she accepts.
Our second happy ending. But it feels earned, doesn't it? Because they both had to grow so much.
Absolutely earned. It's not just a simple they fell in love. It's the culmination of major personal transformation for both of them.
So let's talk about those big themes again. Obviously, pride.
Huge. Darcy's initial pride is obvious his social status, his wealth. But Elizabeth has pride too, doesn't she?
Yeah, pride in her own judgment, her quick wit, her ability to size people up, and it blinds her just as much as Darcy's social pride blinds him.
Exactly. Austen shows how pride, in different forms, prevents us from clearly seeing others and seeing ourselves.
And then prejudice, tied closely to pride, really.
Very closely. Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy is based entirely on that first impression and Wickham's lies. She judges Wickham favorably based on charm and appearance. It's Austen skewering how easily we fall for surface appearances and how class and reputation shape our judgments, often incorrectly.
It's a powerful critique of snap judgments and gossip.
Definitely. And then there's the whole theme of marriage and social class. We touched on it with Mrs. Bennet and Charlotte Lucas.
Right, it wasn't just about love. It was economics, security, social standing. Austen uses these different marriages. Lydia and Wickham's disaster, Charlotte and Collins's pragmatism, Jane and Bingley's sweet match, and finally Elizabeth and Darcy's union of equals to explore all facets of it.
She critiques the system that put women in such a dependent position, while also ultimately showing that a marriage based on mutual respect, understanding, and yes, love is possible, even within those constraints. But it requires growth.
Which brings us to that theme of self-awareness and growth.
Maybe the most central theme, really. Both Elizabeth and Darcy have to confront their flaws. They have to learn from their mistakes, challenge their own biases.
They have to shed that initial pride and prejudice.
Exactly. They evolve. They become more self-aware, more compassionate. Their happy ending isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person through overcoming their own faults.
So to kind of wrap things up, Pride and Prejudice, it's endured for over 200 years, not just because it's a charming love story.
Not at all. It's endured because it's this incredibly insightful, witty, profound look at human nature, society, manners, morality. The lessons feel timeless.
It holds up a mirror, doesn't it? Makes us think about how we judge others, the assumptions we make based on first impressions or what society tells us.
Absolutely. And through Elizabeth and Darcy's journey, Austen ultimately gives us this beautiful message that real connection, real love, requires humility. It requires patience. And maybe most importantly, it requires being willing to look at ourselves, confront our own biases, and be open to changing our minds.
Being willing to see beyond that first impression or that initial prejudice.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about seeing the person underneath and allowing yourself to be seen too.
So here's a final thought for you listening to this deep dive. Think about your own life, your own relationships. What prejudices, maybe subtle ones, might you be holding on to?
Yeah, what assumptions are you making?
And what different, maybe richer, maybe more beautiful truth might be waiting if you were willing to look past them? Something to ponder.